Hey, everybody. I want to just introduce myself. We'll kind of walk through flow of the show today, and then I'm going to introduce our special guest and we'll get into it. So just quickly, I am Zach Conway. I am the founder and CEO of Seeds Investor. I'm not going to talk too much about seeds right this second. We'll save a little bit of that at the end because we want to get right into the topic. As I said, and I think as everybody knows, we have a very special guest today. I'll introduce him in just a second, but just some kind of show notes of format, how this will flow. I'm going to introduce our guest. We're going to then do sort of interview style. So I'm going to ask our guest a bunch of questions, kind of Q&A. He's going to share his insights. Hopefully that's going to spur some of you to think of your own questions. So during the conversation, it should be available for you to actually type questions into the Q&A chat. Feel free to do so, but think of it as sort of a placeholder. So we're not going to on the fly maybe address those questions, but they'll be queued up ready for us for at least hopefully 10 minutes of Q&A after our discussion. So don't worry. If you ask the question, we'll try to get to it during that block time. We'll share some resources at the end, how to get in touch with us on the Seeds team, how to get in touch with our guest and his firm, and then we'll wrap. So that's the game plan. So just quickly, why are we here? What is sort of the premise of this conversation? I think everybody understands that. And excuse me, guys. Hold on one sec. Oh, we're testing Q&A. Okay, it's all working. Excellent. Perfect. So why are we here? We are here to talk about looking inward, leading clients to funded contentment. But why do we want to talk about that? So some quick context. As I said, I'm the founder and CEO of Seeds, but before founding the company, I was helping to run an advisory firm. So I've been in the seat as an advisor, having conversations with clients about their financial future, right? And trying to make sure that we are putting them on a planning path that's right for them and specifically helping them to achieve their goals. But one of the things in our business that we always sort of struggled with is we're sort of quantifying getting to these specific quantifiable financial goals is what we're good at. We can do the math, we can show how the math plays out, but there was still this sort of like underlying tension or miscommunication or misunderstanding about what our value is as the advisor. What are we actually trying to help the client accomplish? And part of the answer is what we realized is the client doesn't necessarily know. What I mean by that is the specific goals are obvious, but the contentment, the future state of their lives, 5, 10, 50 years out in the future, feels opaque. It feels broad. It feels squishy. What is that destination ultimately? Beyond just the dollars and cents piece, what are they aiming at? What do they want to see their lives look like? What does specifically contentment mean to them in more specific terms? And it's not really a surprise or shouldn't be a surprise to us as advisors that it's hard for them to really clearly articulate what that actually means. What does that actually look like for them in that future? And it really shouldn't be a surprise because if we sort of look in the mirror, again, the premise of looking inward, if we think about it in our own lives as advisors, we struggle with the same thing, right? What does our own contentment in that not so distant or more distant future actually look like? We're busy in our lives. Life is complicated. We have a lot going on. We're trying to run our firms. But what exactly are we aiming at? What does that really look like for us? And so we had this thought, maybe if we can better answer that question for ourselves and learn the tactics to define those things for ourselves in our own lives, for our own families, for our own businesses, what does that state of contentment look like? That should hopefully be a good jumping off point to be able to do it for the people we work for, right? Do it for ourselves so that we can do it better for the clients we serve. And the good news is we have a guest today that can help us figure all of that out. That's the goal of the conversation. So I'd love to introduce, I'm very excited to introduce our friend Brian Portnoy. Brian is one of the world's leading experts on the psychology of money. You may have read one of his multiple best-selling books, including The Geometry of Wealth. Brian has 20 plus years of experience as an investor and educator in the financial services industry. He also happens to be a CFA charter holder. And of course, he's the founder of Shaping Wealth, which we'll learn more about today. Brian, welcome.
Zach, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so I gave kind of conceptual context here. If you could jump us off with the sort of 30-second, 1-minute elevator pitch on sort of the why and what of Shaping Wealth as a business, and then we'll kind of go back into the topic at hand.
Yeah, well, the good thing is those two completely overlap because I think we are kind of a mission-driven company. Yeah, so Shaping Wealth is a global coaching and content platform for the advice business. We have clients on 6 continents, and those clients are financial advisors and advisory firms. And the point of today was that we're going to lean into talking about human first advice, behavioral advice. We are a learning and training platform for the industry to create content, courses, coaching, community on all things related to applied behavioral finance, emotional intelligence, neuroscience, positive psychology, and any other discipline that delivers skills to our front doorstep that we can use, number one, to make the client experience that much better. And we'll talk about what that means. But then secondly, and I think and this is where I think the magic is, to help the advisor herself, to help the advisor himself or herself really lean into the career that they've chosen, because our industry has evolved quite dramatically over the last generation or two. So, we are set up to help the helpers, to coach the coaches, and it's exciting.
Fantastic. I'm going to stop screen share here so people can see us. There we go. Awesome. So again, I threw out this term, and it's in the title of the webinar, funded contentment. And I remember initial conversations you and I had, and you used that phrase, and I had this, like, one of those sort of like obvious epiphany moments. It's such a perfect two-word phrase that encapsulates what I was touching on a minute ago, which is the future state of your life, where ultimately we all want to be happy and content, and money can be used as a tool to help us get there. But those two things have to intersect sort of in the right way, and they have to be well defined. If you could give us so I'm putting words in your mouth already. If you could give us your correct definition, how you would define funded contentment, and then if you could kind of segue from there on a little bit of what I was touching on, why do you think it's so hard, not just for our clients, but for us as advisors, humans in general, to actually define it? Why is it such a struggle for us to like know what that means and then sit down and figure out how to get there?
Okay, good. Everyone's comfortable for 3 or 4 hours? Because
yeah. I should also, that's a really good kind of call out. You're running an entire business to answer that question, so this is like the priming exercise, right?
Look, there's one of my favorite lines. All quotes are from Mark Twain, Albert Einstein, or one of the Stoics, right? So, whoever wrote, "If I had more time, I'd write you a shorter letter." I think we've gotten this down relatively tight. Let me state clearly what funded contentment is, and then let's kind of unpack that and go wherever you want to go. And this is an amazing audience. I see here many friends on the call. So funded contentment is true wealth. Funded contentment is the ability to underwrite a life that is meaningful to you, however you choose to define that, and however you choose or are compelled to update that through life's inevitable but unpredictable changes. So funded contentment is the ability to underwrite a meaningful life. And the starting point, kind of where do we go from there? Well, the starting point is just making an important distinction between being rich and being wealthy. I think in Geometry of Wealth, which is where I kind of developed this concept. And then, by the way, the mission statement or rather the vision statement for Shaping Wealth is funded contentment for everyone. Because to the extent that we see wealth as a mindset, mindsets are learnable and coachable. And I see, and we speak frequently with our clientele, the people on, like the people on this call, there's a lot of clients here on the call, is that we train player coaches in the search for funded contentment, and really think about that idea of player coach. You're not only helping others, you're on the field, you're on the pitch as well, because who here doesn't want a life where money and meaning are in alignment? So rich versus wealthy. Rich is the search for more. I think many of us understand what the hedonic treadmill is. It's this idea that no matter how fast we sprint, we really never get that far ahead, that when you achieve a goal and you maybe have that moment of happiness, well, then you just level set. So, to quote Don Draper from Mad Men, happiness is the feeling right before you want more happiness. And the same thing with being rich. How many people here on the call who have clients that become a first-time millionaire and they're like, oh, that's cool. How about 1.5 million? 2 million sounds good. And hey, inevitably, because of your skill and market compounding, you get to 2 million. And guess what happens then? So we're hardwired for more from a neuroscientific point of view. And so I'm not only am I not denigrating more, I'm saying that the search for more is virtuous and it's important, but it also sits in an evergreen and in somewhat irresolvable kind of tension with the satisfaction that we get with enough, that sense of stillness, of feeling full and complete. The idea of funded contentment, the ability to underwrite a life that's meaningful to you, is something that everybody can lean into personally. But then ultimately, when you talk to your clients, it's what they want. And the last thing I'll say, because I want this to be dialogue and not a soliloquy from me, is that I pivoted my career in 2014 from investment management to wealth management. It was a lot of life is luck. And so there were elements there, but this was also partly an expression of my agency leaning away from traditional investment management toward where I think the real action is, which is to help people lead lives that are fulfilling. And I was in a role for many years where I traveled around and I met thousands of financial advisors and tens of thousands of end investors. And what, Zach, the question that almost every single person, whether it's a 62-year-old financial advisor, a 73-year-old retiree, a 27-year-old person who's just starting their career and thinking about all the things, really the only question that everybody's asking all the time is simply this: am I going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? And at a certain point, there's a second question, which is how much is enough? And the okay question and the enough question actually map perfectly and not accidentally to our evolutionary journey of surviving and thriving. Every single day you have to survive. You get one punch on your ticket. And so you got to survive. And that's why we have things like loss aversion, pain. Pain is disproportionately influential to us than is pleasure. We're not going to, deeper topic. But am I going to be okay? This is what people want to know. They don't want to know their earnings estimate on the S&P 500. They don't want to know your projection for inflation in 2025. They might feel compelled to participate in the theater of modern advice where they pretend like they're interested, but they're not. And you're not either. So let's actually talk about what people want to talk about and use funded contentment as or maybe just one anchor concept that clarifies what it is people really want.
So, yeah. So breaking apart again, that 2-word phrase of funded, meaning how does the math work to get us to the outcome of contentment? We naturally, when we hear the word contentment or a meaningful life or a purposeful life, we want that. We intuitively know that we want that. Those all sound like amazing conceptual ideas. And I think what you're touching on is our primitive brain is just trying to find whatever we think the sort of short track to that destination is. And it may be, I just need more, right? It's just, how do I get more? How do I get more? But those aren't the same thing, right? And it ultimately comes back to, how can a human person really articulate for themselves. I think about it often and really try to hold myself accountable to specifically define when I'm 30, how old am I? 35. When I'm 50, when I'm 75, when I'm 100 years old, what is that content? What does contentment actually mean? What does that
Mhm.
mean to me? What does my life look like at that point in those stages of my life? Advisors are good at the funded part, right? And
Yes.
whatever the destination is, I can do the math to tell you on like this specific outcome. You need to pay for college, you want to buy a second home, you want to, if you retire at this age and don't have an income anymore, your assets would be depleted with this spending ratio at age 97 and a half. But you don't actually get the person off the track of, I just need more, I just need more, because again, you're not fully defining that idea of contentment. So let's go to that. So
Yep.
for
Yep.
for
You're going exactly where I hoped you'd go. Keep
yeah,
going.
so for again, before we do it for the client, which is the goal, and we'll get to, kind of how do you ultimately bring it to life from a tactics perspective when the client's sitting across the table from you. But before we get to that, if you were coaching me, right, or anybody for any reason about, okay, you need to sit down to actually figure this out for yourself. What are the, and again, you're running a whole business to really coach
Yeah.
people through this process, but what's the priming exercise to get an advisor to do this for themselves, right? How do they start to define what that means for themselves?
Yeah. Okay. This is really good. Let's set the table in the right way. Um, the first thing, and you and I've talked about this, and I think a lot of people on the call are familiar with the concepts of human first advice, human centric advice, behavioral advice. And, I want to share a tagline, but it's one that's really meaningful to me and hopefully to many of you, which is that human first advice first starts with the advisor as human. I think that there is an obvious virtue to the modern industry versus old school selling a product. I think there's a virtue to the modern industry in that we actually care deeply about our clients. So I talked about the walkabout I've had in my career. I've met north of 10,000 advisors. I would say north of 99% of them seem to truly care about the well-being of the families that they are taking care of. Well, that's great. Um, what gets lost in the mix in trying to serve those clients is the provider of the advice. Before we get to how can the advisor take care of herself or himself, because self-care, self-awareness, those are things that we really want to dig into. Let's talk about funded contentment as a tool, not a concept. Okay, it's a tool. Everyone imagine a Swiss Army knife and it's got different moving pieces. Funded contentment is a tool or a technology that you can use in your practice in the following sense. It actually structures the advice process in a way where you are, if not compelled, encouraged to think first about contentment and secondly about funded. I wrote a prior book published in 2014 called The Investor's Paradox. And that was, I think, a good book, but it was effectively a book about getting rich. It was a book about making better investment decisions. And that's cool. And I got to the end of that book and I said, well, really, who the hell cares? Like, I'm not going to throw it out, but like, all right, I'm now worried about the bigger picture here. And so, Zach, the way you set it up in terms of all of us being well equipped to do the financial projections, to cash flow model, all the things that allow us to give confidence and comfort to our client, though we do that well, and it is by definition a good thing. But if we want funded contentment, I'm guessing many people, when I first described it, said, yeah, that's a good thing. I'd like that. The tool or the technology to achieve it is to first ask yourself, what is contentment to me? So, there's a huge literature. It's actually going back to Aristotle, but there's a huge literature on what is happiness. And I'll summarize, close to 3,000 years of history by saying there's two operative ideas. One is day-to-day pleasure versus pain. And that's what the hedonists talked about. And then the other thing is what Aristotle called eudaimonia, what Danny Kahneman and others would call contentment. which is sort of a deeper sense of your life is going as you had hoped. You feel like you have a sense of purpose or meaning. Funded contentment as a tool relies on us saying, number one, what are those sources of contentment to me at this moment in life? And it's a moving target. So this is a lifelong pursuit, Zach. This is not a one and done. This isn't a worksheet for you or your client. We're like, hey, what's meaningful to you? What are your values? Great. Now for the next 5 or 15 or 30 years, let's build a plan. No, this is an ongoing engagement that requires a fair amount of skill as a coach, in addition to being a straight up advisor. What are the sources of contentment? And then I'm going to give you the model for that in a second, because there's 4 sources of contentment. It's what I call the 4 C's. Once you have that reasonably well defined, then you can ask the question, well, how do I afford that stuff? How can I underwrite those things, those experiences, whatever it is that I said is meaningful to me? So that's the tool or the technology of funded contentment. Step 1, what is contentment to me? Not what's making me happy or putting me in a good mood or a bad mood on a daily basis, but what are those deep sources of a meaningful life? And then secondly, how do I arrange the what we call the 7 dimensions of money, life, earning, saving, spending, borrowing, protecting, investing, giving? I think I'm forgetting 1 or 2, but how do you take all of those dimensions of money life and align them? All right, so what are the 4 sources of contentment? Connection, control, competence, and context. There's a really rich tradition in positive psychology that started about 30 to 40 years ago. Marty Seligman, many of you might be familiar with. This is a model that I built that's a slight adaptation on what Marty and others have built. But as they say, all models are wrong and some are useful. So you can rely on Marty's PERMA model. You can rely on Portnoy's 4C model. There's a lot of different ways to go here. We have found in coaching advisors all over the world, the 4C's model is very easy to understand, but also like really practical. Like you can have good specific conversations about this. So connection. Connection is that deep sense of belonging. We are actually born as tribal creatures before we're born as sovereign individuals. From a neuroscientific point of view, that's just fact. We're sort of born connected to a tribe, and then through life, we define our individual identity. And so there's almost arguably nothing more important than our sense of connection to others, that sense of belonging. And if you look at the famous study that was done at Harvard over 90 years as to like what led people to lead happy lives, it was relationships. Relationships matter. Okay. Keep in mind, and you know this, we could spend hours on each of the 4 C's. So number 1 is connection. Number 1 is control. And it's the other side of the coin. Yes, you want to be connected. Yes, you want to express your loyalty to the tribe, but you also want independence, freedom, opportunity, liberty. Who doesn't want to be able to do have that for themselves? You want to be able to go where you want to go, do what you want to do, and tell the story that you want to tell. And so Andy Dufresne in The Shawshank Redemption, in some sense, was always free because he never lost hope and was able to tell the story about the life he wanted to live, physically imprisoned, spiritually autonomous and free. The 3rd C is competence. And this is mastery over something that's important to you, a job, a vocation, a hobby. It's the ability to slip at times into those flow states when time literally stops moving, and you're writing or you're playing guitar or you're playing basketball or you're talking with friends or whatever it is, but like time has disappeared. And so the flow state is the tip of the spear of this competence bucket, the 3rd bucket, but it's basically a meaningful life stems from a sense of belonging, a sense of autonomy, a sense of being really good at something that's valuable to you. And then the 4th C is context. And this is purpose. This is tapping into the idea that people who live for something beyond themselves tend to lead more meaningful lives. And the 2 pillars for context that I talk about a lot are faith and place. Spirituality and religion are not topics that are common to the financial advisory world, but the fact of the matter is, most people, whether it's religion or faith or spirituality or whatever the word you use, and we're not going to go there, so to speak, but to the extent that you have a story that connects you to the broader cosmos, your life is more meaningful. And then the 2nd pillar, in addition to faith, is place. It's your hometown pride. It's your patriotism. It's some sort of geographic identity. half the people on this call who I know are so sick of me talking about growing up in Pittsburgh, but I don't care. We bleed black and gold, even though I sit here in Chicago for many decades, and that hometown pride has never left me. So I'll tie a bow around it, Zach, by just saying that there's 4 sources of contentment: our sense of belonging, our sense of autonomy, our sense of mastery, and our sense of purpose: connection, control, competence, and context. When we lean into that exploration, number one, I think it's kind of enjoyable. I mean, we're not philosophers, right? We're not sitting around ruminating on the good life all day, but we can think about those things. And then secondly, at some point say, wow, that sense of belonging in its very, very specific representation, what does that cost? Like, let's be crude about it deliberately. Like, what's the price tag on connection with others? And if it's joining a country club, well, there's a price to that. If it's hanging out with your neighbors, there's a price to that, and so on and so forth. Hence the technology of funded contentment.
Awesome. Yeah, I see that hierarchy of, okay, I'm starting with the 4 C's to understand. Because again, it's like you start at the top. I want contentment. We all do. The 4 C's are the next layer below of what actually can help fulfill that. And then I can imagine, again, underneath, once you as an advisor or anybody can conceptualize your version of each of those 4 C's, then the next step is, okay, what are the more tangible things in your life that you're doing in your community, in the work that you do for your families, the details, the tangible details of what then rolls up to the 4 C's to ultimately that contentment. If it's not obvious, I'm a visual learner as I describe it back to you.
My book's called The Geometry of Wealth because I leaned on 3 shapes: a circle, a triangle, and a square.
Yeah.
Trust me, I'm visual as well.
Yeah, it helps. And one of the things that stands out to me as sort of paradoxical as you break down the 4 C's is just to pick on the competence one for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as advisors, it's like, what are we trying to help clients do? It's the default answer is successfully retire, have enough money to go into retirement, right? And it's on a lot of people's websites. And
Yeah.
And what is amazing about that is, and all the statistics, again, we could probably spend an hour just on this topic. That's not a destination that's right for people, meaning you have that feeling of competence and mastery on a job that hopefully you enjoy. By the way, to your point, everything should be a work in progress, because if you think about competence and mastery today versus your post-retirement date, we always ask clients, do you like what you do for a living? Do you actually sense that today? Right? Because I can show you how mathematically your income is going to make sure you can pay the bills in the future. But like, do you like getting up in the morning and going to do the job you do? Anyway, because that's important, it needs to be important at that next phase of life. Maybe you're not working that, 8 to 7 p.m. job, even though you loved it, and you do want to have a change in what you're waking up to do every day. But if we as advisors aren't defining, again, for ourselves, what does that retirement phase actually look like? There's no chance I'm going to, be on a sailboat at age 65 or whatever. I mean, I will sometimes, but I'm going to need to be doing something meaningful where I feel like I have a competence over something important. And so you get clients to this retirement age destination and you haven't helped them define that. Have you really helped them fulfill that idea of contentment? Arguably not. Yeah. So I feel like that's a great, within the 4 C's, that's sort of a stands out to me as specifically paradoxical in how we think of the industry sometimes.
Each of the 4 C's is a fresh set of conversations that an advisor can have with a client over many, many years. Everybody on the call here who serves clients, that there's the initial prospecting and the deeper dive diligence and discovery on the client situation, plan presentation. They love it. They onboard with you 6 months, year, couple years of kind of cleaning up some messes, solving some near-term pain points. But you often get to a case in 3, 5, let alone 10 years where they're kind of okay most of the time. And they're sort of questioning, why am I paying this dude? Like, what am I getting out of this? And there's a bunch of answers. I think financial advice is one of the most unsung virtuous careers that exists. But one of the answers to the question is that you can, and I don't know, should, but can be equipped to have these conversations where you go from fine to flourish, where you go to conversations about connection, control, competence, context, and pick your own words. There, this is about, in a lot of our coaching programs, we want to distinguish that, like, well, we're going to suggest some words, but you're going to find your voice. So I'm not saying use the 4 C's per se. I mean, use it. It's yours. It's everybody's. It's a mental model. But these sorts of conversations are probably among the better conversations to be having in years 3 through 30 of a relationship, because chances are you did your job pretty well in years 0 through 3, and now they're just kind of getting along. And if, especially if you have a commercial appetite to grow your business, the referral worthy moments aren't probably going to come from the updated cash flow model. They're going to come from that better conversation where the Millers or the Clarks or the Joneses say, not only do we seem to be okay, but boy, this is more than I thought it would be. This is great. And then they tell their neighbor or a fellow parishioner or somebody at work. There's commercial implications for doing this well.
And I want to spend even a couple more minutes on that, right? These tangible benefits. I have a couple thoughts I'll share, and certainly yours. Keep going on. So hopefully, advisors on the call, 4 C's, self-assessment. Again, there's a lot of layers underneath, and that a firm like yours, Brian, would facilitate for an advisor kind of going through the thought exercises. Jump to, though, okay, I understand this conceptually. I've done the self-assessment. I have confidence in what my funded contentment is and how to get there. Hopefully that's step one. Then, okay, we're at step 2. We have an advisory business. We want to make sure that, okay, if I can do it, I'm bringing it to life the right way with the right tactics to the next person who walks in my door. For you guys at Shaping Wealth, can you speak to like more specific tactics and maybe what's most effective? Everybody's always trying to figure out, like, what's the first thing or second thing I could just bring into my business to start to bring this to life.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? Just what those more specific tactics might look like.
Yeah. So I'm glad you phrased it the way that you did, because I don't think step 1's been fully scaffolded. And let me explain why. The underlying, the DNA of this conversation is emotional intelligence. I have bad news for everyone, including and especially myself. Your IQ is immutable. No one, including and especially me, is going to get smarter. We're stuck. EQ is actually a skill. So the entire idea of emotional intelligence, coined by Daniel Goleman not that long ago, just a couple 3 decades ago. I mean, we throw around EQ like it's a thing, and it is, but it's relatively brand new in modern parlance and modern organizational psychology, modern human capital development, all these different fields. A lot of what we're doing at Shaping Wealth is introducing this idea of emotional intelligence, its constituent parts, how they work together, and then how they deliver a better client experience with, I mean, again, we're building businesses here, significant consequences for commercial growth. So the missing piece to step 1, Zach, is the claim, which I think is evidenced, but the claim I'm about to make, which is that self-awareness is the fuel in the tank for empathy. Nobody on this call needs to be convinced that empathy is a superpower of anybody in a helping profession. So whether you're a medical doctor or clergy or a financial advisor or a therapist, empathy, which is probably a more robust and somewhat more complicated concept than many people realize. It is not walking in other people's shoes. I'll just plant that flag for now. We want to show up and be empathetic, because the benefits of empathy is that the person across the table or the Zoom screen, they feel seen and heard and understood. And you can be, each of us is, everyone here has a vertical leap, right? Zach, I'm so much older than you. I'm pretty sure that my vertical leap is less than yours at this point. But everybody here has a vertical leap. Everybody's vertical leap can get a little bit better. Same thing with empathy. You're born with a certain vertical leap. and you age into it, but with a little bit of proper training, it can get better. So that's empathy. So if you think about the value of being slightly more empathic, what that can do to your client relationships, I'm just going to stipulate that that's a very good thing. But how do you get there? Well, one of the things that we know from the modern science, and it is evidence-based science on emotional intelligence, is that deeper self-awareness drives deeper empathy. So the missing piece to the scaffold that we've been building over the time we've spent together today, that we can now, set up and move on from, is that we want to know our own sources of contentment and a lot of other things. But today we're talking about fun and contentment. We want to know what's a meaningful life to us, because when we go through that process ourselves, we naturally hear and listen and ask better questions. So I'll come full circle to my opening claim that empathy is the fuel. Self-awareness is the fuel in the tank for empathy. And so going through this process yourself, having your own ducks in a row, knowing that the ducks get, all messed up, and most of life is just resetting the ducks in a row. Like, they're never fully set, right? We're always living a life in transition, a life filled with disruption and change. So that gets us to where we need to be. The next question then is, like, how do you apply this in your practice? And this is where we get into proper and rigorous expressions of empathy. If empathy is a skill, the term that we use at Shaping Wealth, and a few of our top students are here on the call today, they know this idea of rigorous empathy. And we say rigorous empathy because if you treat it as a discipline, it means that you can get better at it. And there are just a variety. I mean, we have a 15-step trademark process, as it were, that allows you to show up in a way that will have very obvious and measurable impacts on your conversations, in a way where your client is going to feel seen and heard in a way that they hadn't before. And those are the referral worthy moments. So let me cherry pick. If there's 15 steps, I'm not going to go through them all. I'll cherry pick a few. Step 6 or 7 is to validate. It is simply to acknowledge what somebody has said, to make sure that they know that you have heard. And we dip even deeper tactically into conversational techniques in terms of the specific things that you can say, not that you have to say, but that you can say, in that allow the client to be heard. It could be, for example, just repeating what they've said. They tell you a story, they tell you about the retirement vision, and you repeat that back to them. And there is something that happens neurologically in that moment where they are better connected to you. You're deepening trust at that moment. Another step of the rigorous empathy protocol is how to ask questions. And this is, this is really big. What I want to share with everybody, just for today's purposes, is that a question is an invitation, not an interrogation. Dr. Joy Leary, one of my partners, magical human being. She's a blog called Finding Joy, Substack. Everybody should subscribe. Free Substack. Questions are invitations, not interrogations. How are you posing questions so that you're not constantly in fact-finding and diligence mode, versus asking questions that create space so that people can express themselves, that you can then react to? So I just gave you 2 out of 15 steps of how to be more empathetic, but like, this is how we got from mountaintop, Aristotle, eudaimonia, contentment, funded contentment, all the way expressing that into the financial planning process, and then tactical expressions of the skill of empathy. So you can kind of see a zip line from the mountaintop to the ground floor, but it's step by step. So, we're not here, just making stuff up, drawing pictures and inspiring. We are here giving tactical skills that you can bring to your practice that you can use every day, and that a lot of people on the call that are managing teams of advisors, well, this is scalable. This is scalable.
Brian, I'm going to screen share again here in a second and pull up a slide on you guys. And you can, if you could just kind of share what offerings look like. As people go to your site, there's a resource for your overview presentation. There's a QR code. I'll pull it up in just a second. But if you could kind of give that overview of how people can connect with you guys. The one thing I wanted to double click on that you just touched on. So again, yeah, we're doing the hierarchy thing. We've got the build, understand how to what empathy means and how to bring it to life in conversations. That starts with this self assessment process we're talking about, looking inward. But then one of those tactical parts in your business to bring it to life as you bring it to the client. And again, another hour-long conversation, but discovery meetings, the initial moments of interaction with the people who walk in your door, or your Zoom meetings as prospective clients. So much of that, to your point, has been about, let me go through effectively like my checklist of how to get all your balance sheet information and these basic metrics so that I can do my comprehensive financial plan, as opposed to really getting to the heart of the matter. What is the real reason you've walked into my office? Right? The underlying issues, and how can I start to lay the groundwork for, hey, we're going to better define this concept of funded contentment, not just, again, the mathematical equation of how you're going to be quote unquote financially independent. But that discovery meeting moment, and you and I have talked about asking these questions that give space, and then hearing the answers, and then navigating. This is where the EQ part comes in. The follow-up question isn't always the same. You need to adapt in the room to, if I'm asking you this conceptual thing and you're giving me this answer, or you're unclear in your answer, or you're going in a certain direction I didn't expect, you need to be shaping the conversation around what you're learning and have it be a truly dynamic conversation. It can't just be a fact-finding process like this assembly line experience, but it starts with discovery, right? And then to your point, that needs to bleed through. In our wealth business, that was one of the biggest learning experiences of, you kick the can when you don't do it, when you really don't get to the heart of it, and you're just doing the mathematical stuff out of the gate. That's if they become your client, that's with you forever. That unspoken thing for the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever, you're not ever really on the same page, right? Because you haven't done that deeper discovery and helped them define, as we said at the beginning, that clarity of what that future state and future contentment looks like.
Well, there's been this evolution over the decades, and you and your firm, you've been around for decades, and I have a sense of how what a good job you've done over time. The evolution has gone from product to plan to relationship. And so, forget the product stuff. I doubt many people here on the call are just sort of, just trying to do commission-based sales. But then, planning, that's a really good thing. But if you're just focused on, as you point out, sort of mechanically checking the box on all of the pieces of information, you have really missed out on the opportunity to set the groundwork now for a multi-year, multi-decade, and multi-generational relationship with with these folks. So it's really about, well, what are you doing now to fortify, to buttress the relationship? And let's assume for the moment that we're just all self-interested capitalists, and it's about running a profitable enterprise. Nothing wrong with that. Well, this is also the smart way to make money.
Yeah.
It also happens to be virtuous. It also happens to be the right way to run your business.
Yeah, it makes the relationships truly engaging and not have that unspoken thing. That's the nice to have, but the reality is it's a good business model, right? People are going to stick with you, not question your values, not to be perceived about what return you got versus the S&P 500 last quarter. They know that you understand them deeply and that you're actually trying to point them in the right direction in this more meaningful way. That pays dividends, right? There's very tangible outcomes there for a business. Brian, I have a feeling we're going to get a few questions here, so I want to go
Yeah.
to
And we have a
if you
bunch.
could.
Yeah, it looks like we have a bunch in the
Yeah,
queue.
so we'll jump there in one sec. If you could just, we've got your stuff on the screen here. So this is a QR code. People should scan it. But Brian, if you could just speak to where people find you guys and kind of how to sign up.
Yeah, thanks. So, so shapingwealth.com, this QR code links you to a piece that we put together quite recently, very recently, that really sort of corrals all of the building blocks that we've created for either one-off experiences or designed customized learning journeys. And some people just want to dip in and they want a free piece of content. We got that. You want a 1 hour webinar to learn a specific thing. We got that too. But then increasingly, we're connecting with firms that, see the value of human capital, starting with their own team, because we really believe, to that line I used before, human first advice first starts with the advisor as human, first starts with the advisory firm, filled with humans. What is your engagement on self-awareness and emotional intelligence and well-being and things like that? So, we've got an immersive coaching program called Building the Behavioral Advisor. We just wrapped up the 10th cohort for that. Cohort 11 launches in September. We have a really fun, easy 4 hour workshop spread over 4 weeks called the Foundations of Behavioral Advice. Zach, your firm is participating in this. But we have more than 100 people from 6 different countries, and it's a team and culture building experience. What is my friend Stephanie in the chat here, or in the question, awkward conversations about contentment. It is hard to go there. We're laying the foundation for how to have those conversations, not only with your client, but with your colleagues, so that you're creating a more human-centric, higher EQ wealth culture. We've got a free always on content dashboard. We call it the outsourced chief behavioral officer. We like to think of ourselves as sort of chief behavioral officers for advice firms all over the world. And you could sign up for free for that, get a bunch of cool things. And then there's premium experience as well, and so on and so forth. So growing quickly and just loving what is clearly a global movement. Clients in Auckland, New Zealand, clients in Los Angeles, clients in Toronto, clients in London. And it's amazing to see the similarities among all of you across the world, wanting to further lean in to do right by others, to be servant leaders effectively, and saying, boy, we need some training. We need a partner in all of this. And so me, Neil, Joy, Meg, my whole team, we're just leaning into like figuring out ways to help, and work in progress.
Amazing. And someone mentioned here they're not seeing the QR code. If anybody, so that the code on the screen, hopefully other people can see it, but it's to Shaping Wealth's overview presentation collateral. So if anybody is having an issue with the QR code, just say so in the Q&A, and we'll make sure, just give us your emails if you don't mind, and we can make sure that we get that out to you. We'll also have follow-up to everybody, so we can make sure folks get that. Okay, quick piece on what we're doing at Seeds, and then in the meantime, if just start putting in Q&A. I know there's just a couple of minutes left, so if anybody has a question you want to drop into the Q&A, so we're ready for it. Seeds, and the reason Brian and I have been having all of these conversations is philosophically aligned in how we think about advisors delivering the right kind of experience around investing specifically. So there's the broader relationship, there's broader financial planning, and trying to deliver, as we talked about today, funded contentment. At the end of the day, as advisors, we still do and think it makes sense to do this thing called investment management. And really understanding who people are and how they think specifically when it comes to investing, we think is a meaningful part of that deep discovery process. Because again, so much can go unspoken. When people hand their hard-earned money to us human advisors to put into capital markets, what are they actually thinking in their head about what the heck that means? Who are they as investors, right? There's all the other things, as we've touched on, that we want to make sure we know, but I want to know who each person is as an investor. And if I do that, and Seeds provides an assessment tool to empower advisors to do that in that discovery experience, then I can hopefully put people in the right portfolio that brings it all to life. And just as important, I can talk about their money invested in capital markets in a way that actually speaks to them, that actually makes sense. Are you detail oriented where you actually care about all those jargony mechanical terms? Or, man, I spent years putting stuff up on a screen for people who really didn't. And if I had known that, how could I have shaped the moment of proposal, the moment of having conversations about the invested money during review meetings? So that's the idea. Seeds delivers for advisors an assessment tool that leads to custom portfolio outcomes and engagement and insights to go deeper on how they're invested. So really the goal is, can you deliver that more meaningful experience around investing, but also make it simpler and more efficient and more scalable for us as advisors in our businesses, trying to have, win on both sides of the equation, if you will. So with that, those are our QR codes, so you can sign up for a demo. We also have a podcast. Definitely subscribe. But let's, Brian, in the last couple of minutes here, we'll hit on some of these questions coming in. Let's see. So we've got a very long one that may be hard to address here at the top.
It's actually a quote. It's a quote from probably the most important book anyone can read, which is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And I'll just take this quickly and just thank Tiffany for surfacing Frankl. He and his work have been influential to me as a dad, as a husband, as well as a writer and a business builder. Man's Search for Meaning, if people on the call haven't read it, he was a Holocaust survivor. He survived Auschwitz, came out on the other side, invented a whole new field of human psychology called logotherapy. And this one book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is relatively brief, and the part to read is the first half, because the second half's a little bit technical about psychology. So it's a pretty quick read, but it's basically where do we find meaning in life during the darkest of times? And so, I don't know if there's a question here. Well, how do you incorporate this quote into your practice? That I'm not going to try. That's a high wire act on a live webinar. So I'm just going to thank Tiffany for servicing one of the more important things that anyone can read.
There's a question in here, Brian. How does one build a healthy identity with money, but not attach their sense of value to the amount of money they have, as that can change often? So it's to your points earlier of our primitive brain goes to contentment. The quickest way to that is just, I need more, 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 and more. Again, a loaded question, but what's effective in detaching people from that, right? Like I know how and why you think that, and it's all about just the dollar value going up. And oh my gosh, if it goes down when the S&P goes down, contentment is gone. How do we detach people from that in a simple way?
Yeah. And I appreciate Trillian jumping in. She's a new friend of mine, so I'm happy to see her here. The question just leads me right back to home base, which is funded contentment as a tool or a technology. Recall what I said. Start with contentment. Step 2 is funded. And it's ephemeral. It comes and goes. There's no way to keep, unless you're monk-like in your concentration somehow. All of us are being whipsawed in a endless information world. But if you think about your mindset around what's important to me, not money, but the 4 C's: connection, control, competence, context, those are our ports in a storm. Those are the things. They do evolve and change over time, but those are ballast. They allow us to focus on what's really important, also recognizing that through life's transitions and disruptions, those can evolve. But still, at any moment in time, this is what's important to me. The balance, your account balance goes up 20% and you feel that dopamine. It goes down 20% and you feel like you want to throw up. If you can keep that in mind, either by yourself, but I would prefer people work with an advisor or some sort of financial counselor, that's how we find stability. You use funded contentment as a tool, a two-step process, contentment first, funded second. And I think that's about the best we can do. And it never means that we're done. It just means that we are going to maybe, the oscillation, the band of the oscillation is going to be relatively narrow to what it could be if we don't have those anchor concepts.
Brian, I am my team is reminding me we had 45 minutes. I thought I was going based on an hour timeline. So we're actually 10 minutes over, but
Okay.
we have a ton of people
I have
still
4
here.
more hours of stuff, man. I mean, what are you talking
Exactly.
about? Come on.
Well, I think to that point, the goal here today was really to prime people, to get people thinking about, again, this idea of funded contentment is the outcome I should be driving to. I need to actually understand what that means for me. What are the exercises to start to think about that process? Therefore, what tactics can I start to use in my business? And what does that ultimately mean in terms of tangible benefits for me in a business trying to make money? So we touched on each of those, but obviously a lot more to cover within each of those areas, and that's why you're here, and that's where people can go to really dive deeper on all of those topics. So I encourage everybody to please connect with Brian. In fact, let me go back here if people haven't gotten to it, shapingwealth.com. And Brian, thank you so much. We'll have to do it again.
Zach, this is great. Thanks. And thanks to everybody for showing up.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. See you next time.